Inspired by a popular uprising in Tunisia, thousands of Egyptians took to the streets demanding the ouster of President Hosni Mubarak. Just how worried should this regime be? And will unseating President Mubarak be easy? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. After a series of mass protests in Egypt, the government has banned any further demonstrations. It's also warning protesters they will be prosecuted if rallies continue. The clampdown comes after a wave of protests swept through Egypt, leaving at least 4 dead. Raya Rage reports from Cairo.
Central Cairo, a battlefield. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, police moved in. Just listen. Scenes the capital hadn't witnessed in living memory. The one thing these pictures cannot relay, the choking tear gas-filled air. This was the scene just a few hours earlier, a defiant crowd taking their day of anger into the night. Sporadic confrontations had been erupting throughout the day, some resulting in deaths and injuries.
They shot at us. They shot at us. Why? I don't know. Who are we? The enemy? Am I an enemy of the state? I came here to ask just for rights. I came here to ask for a home, for a dignified life, for a regime in power for 30 years to go away.
Inspired by the events in Tunisia, Egyptian activists had used social networking sites to spread the word and plan their protest. Calls for an uprising against security forces, as well as poverty, corruption and unemployment. Anger has been brewing here for years. Egyptians no stranger to the kind of economic hardships that toppled the Tunisian regime. But protests had remained limited, and many such calls had fizzled out, all until Tuesday. The day of anger literally breaking new grounds, with ordinary Egyptians, not just activists, taking to the streets.
We are tired, ma'am. We are tired. Stop the price hikes. We are suffering. We are Egyptians. We love Egypt. But stop this. We want to eat. We want to live. We and our children.
But as a traditionally apathetic populace made history on Tuesday, a police force that initially showed some leniency ultimately decided not to break with tradition after all. Rawi Rageh for Inside Story.
In his State of the Union address, meanwhile, the U.S. President Barack Obama said he supports the democratic aspirations of all people, referring to the uprising in Tunisia. The U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton urged restraint by all parties in Egypt.
We support the fundamental right of expression and assembly for all people, and we urge that all parties exercise restraint and refrain from violence. But our assessment is that the Egyptian government is stable and is looking for ways to respond to the legitimate needs and interests of the Egyptian people.
For more on these protests and their potential impact, we're joined by Rabab El-Mahdi, an assistant professor at the American University in Cairo and a social activist for the Kifaya movement, and from London, author and journalist Afshin Rattanzi. He launched one of the first English-language satellite channels in the Middle East and has been covering events in the region for more than a decade. Welcome to you both. Rabab El-Mahdi, the U.S. assessment is quite clear. The Egyptian government is stable. Just how stable do you think the Egyptian government is, and how nervous should Washington be about the fate of its long-term ally, President Hosni Mubarak?
I think Washington, in the statement by Mrs. Clinton, projects their desires and aspirations. Mubarak has been their ally for 30 years now. He's been one of their men in the region. Accordingly, the statement that came out yesterday expresses their desire and which side they're on. They're definitely on the side of their man in the region. Anything else is rhetorical. The tear gas that the protesters were shot by yesterday, the rubber bullets that were shot and killed people yesterday have been financed by the U.S. assistance to Egypt. So.
Afshin Rattansi, how much of a dilemma then is Washington in? It's talking now about the need to see reform in Egypt and elsewhere. The U.S. State Department statement says is a partner of Egypt and the Egyptian people. Can it be a partner of both the Egyptian government and the Egyptian people at the same time?
Well, as Rabab said, those bullets and of course people have been dying were financed by the U.S. taxpayer. I'm not sure how many U.S. citizens realize that. The opening here, when you said that Hillary Clinton said the Mubarak regime will respond, we're seeing how the Mubarak regime is responding. It shows that in the State Department there seems to be complete chaos. They don't seem to be know what's going on. In Obama's State of the Union speech, there was more of a nod towards the demonstrators. But there again, we've often heard of rhetoric from Washington, especially from the White House, extolling the virtues of democracy, even as in this case we hear the Secretary of State saying something very different. I think we've got a perfect storm here. Those economic problems, WikiLeaks-inspired, self-immolation-inspired revolutions in nearby countries, and this chaos in Washington.
Rabab El-Mahdi, Egypt, and you both alluded to this, gets something to the tune of $1.3 billion a year in U.S. military aid. Does that help in the promotion of democracy at all? Does it even begin to create the kind of economic environment that the Egyptians are looking for, or does it simply strengthen the regime's ability to confront popular movements?
I think this even academically have been proven that the bulk of the U.S. assistance to Egypt goes in one of two ways, either to American subcontractors, so it feeds into the American economy through buying American wheat, so on and so forth, or actually in terms of military training, security training, and military equipment and training that supports the existing regime. So let's take the Egyptian people out of this equation when we're talking about the American administration and their support to the Mubarak regime, both moral and material.
Afshin Rattansi, the government quickly stepped in here to put an end to these demonstrations, as they have done in the past. The Egyptians very clearly want to emulate the Tunisians in their protests, but how far do you think they'll be able to go given the many constraints they face?
Well, I think Arabs right across the Maghreb and people around the world had to draw a breath when they saw these kinds of actions on the streets in Egypt. The Interior Ministry had said something. Interior Minister had said something like, maybe a stationary protest is okay, given the brutality of the Egyptian police. We know so many human rights organizations talking about torture in Egypt's prisons. The guts one needs to be able to demonstrate in Cairo or Suez or any of the other towns these demonstrations are happening in is amazing. I think even some analysts who are overly optimistic would have been surprised. However, it is very early days, and in 2005 in Egypt we thought something was happening. In 2008, this time perhaps it is different because there doesn't seem to be, it's as if the Obama administration isn't really looking at foreign policy issues. It's now looking at internal United States issues. The CIA, which of course supported the Tunisian government, seemed to give the nod. Some conspiracy theorists called it the CIA revolution in Tunisia, which I think is a bit harsh, because I think it was a popular uprising. But if the Americans really are willing to let Egypt go, then that's a huge difference in Egyptian policy, let alone the mass of Egyptian people who have always opposed their client, the US's client regime.
Yes, but it was an internal domestic opposition that brought about the fall and the downfall of the Ben Ali regime after 23 years. President Mubarak's been in power for about 30. Rabab El-Mahdi, the group that you belong to, the movement Kifaya, which means enough in Arabic, seems to have lost some of its momentum, the momentum it had certainly a few years ago. Why hasn't the opposition in Egypt been able to garner the same level of support and create a broad-based opposition movement that would bring about reform?
I think, things take time, and change is a process. People assume that if you have a social movement, if you have a protest movement, that, it's an upgoing graph, sort of, where things keep going and escalating. And actually, all social movements have ups and downs depending on many factors, internal within the movement, external within their historical context, and even within the international context. No one and even 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago assumed that one of the most brutal dictatorships in the Arab world would be the Ben Ali regime would fall in Tunisia. And it happened.
But still your movement and the opposition in general in Egypt faces a lot of criticism that it's been disunited, not organized enough. Can you broaden the base of support and become a genuine popular movement? Can you find the middle ground between the Islamists and the liberals in the country?
Okay, a number of things here. I think what we should be counting on, and why yesterday was monumental in Egyptian history, is that we shouldn't be counting on the Egyptian elitist opposition or organized opposition, let alone. I think the masses, what I saw yesterday of people, young people going on the street for the first time with a level of political awareness that I was very pleasantly surprised. This is what we're looking at here. What we're looking at here is an accumulation of mobilization by labor, by youth, by non-politicized people from the middle and working class over the past 5 years that's actually culminating now in what we are seeing yesterday, plus, of course, the very inspirational experience of the Tunisian revolution.
Afshin Rattanzi, does it look like it is the tipping point for the movement of opposition in Egypt? Mohammed El-Baradei, who's a new political force in the equation, says that this is a government now living on borrowed time. Do you think Mubarak's days are numbered?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Mohammed El-Baradei, of course, the man who was at the IAEA in Vienna and tried to become president. Some people thought, at first, he was advising people not to protest. He said he's not going to steal other people's thunder. It's very interesting to see entrenched interests in the opposition. As far as I understand it, the Muslim Brotherhood is not participating. And you see lots of different parties not participating. Of course, your other guest's party is. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to even the establishment opposition, because as alluded to earlier, there's a demographic time bomb as well as the economic time bomb for Egypt. And those young people on the streets of Cairo, they've lost interest in the established opposition, because there really isn't an established opposition, because as we know, the elections were completely fraudulent.
Rabab El-Mahdi, if the Muslim Brotherhood, which does appear to be in the background now, does come to the fore and takes the lead on this, could it deal a very severe blow to the protesters and their aims?
I think the Muslim Brotherhood will not do this. The Muslim Brotherhood adopts non-confrontational politics most of the time, and this is what we've seen during the past 10 years of mobilization that we've witnessed in Egypt. It's very interesting, and again, one of the monumental things, not only that, your layman people were the bulk of protesters yesterday, regular men and women, but actually the only organized forces that were present are the ones supposedly on the fringe. The revolutionary socialists, the renewal socialist Marxists of every sort, some of El-Ghad party, and individuals from the Muslim Brotherhood. But you had one of the biggest episodes of mobilization being taken over by regular Egyptians from the silent majority, and taking us away from the mainstream understanding of Egyptian politics as an equation that only includes the Mubarak regime as opposed to the Muslim Brotherhood.
What about the army? What about the army, which plays a pivotal role in many countries in the region, of course, Egypt as well? Is there any indication that the army could turn against the government and help bring about its downfall, as was the case in Tunisia?
Up till now, there are no indications of such a thing, and you have to understand, in Egypt, the army is much bigger and much more entrenched than the case of Tunisia, and being in an authoritarian regime, this is a complete black box. Any talk about the army in Egypt, I believe, is mere speculation.
Afshin Rattanzi, of course, this has to be seen as well against the backdrop of presidential elections, which will take place next year. If the Mubarak regime and if President Mubarak survives this, do you think it will have to force a reassessment of whether or not his son, Gamal, will take over and carry on the dynasty?
Well, of course, Gamal is saying that he doesn't want to be president. I think most people would now say Gamal doesn't really stand a chance, but there are other issues, of course, about wider Middle Eastern policy, which is why the US supports Egypt so much. I think now people will be looking at that, especially because of events in Lebanon. The United States is having to look at all of these issues all together and doesn't seem to have made a proper decision. The Egyptian people obviously will not be supporting Gamal at all. So it's really, I mean, it's, as Rabab mentioned, the Egyptian army, and Egypt has a 20th century history of people in the army having coups themselves. So there could be a power vacuum which would result in something that the protesters might not want, nor the Islamists, but something from inside the army.
How much of these demonstrations, though, do you think, Afshin Rattansi, is directed at Western influence and the continuous support that Western governments have given these autocratic rulers in the region?
Well, the aid budget, which already has been alluded to, which actually impoverishes Egypt because it has a deficit, import-export deficit with the United States, which is very rare for a foreign country vis-a-vis the US. Because of all the contractors, it doesn't benefit Egypt, all the aid money coming in from the United States. The army benefits because billions are sent to pay for those bullets and all those guns. So we have to see whether the United States, which is cutting that budget, and because it's cutting generally because of the economic crisis, this will hold another key element to the story.
Rabab El-Mahdi, how resilient and sustained do you think these demonstrations will be in the face of the government crackdown? And the government did come out today and say there will be no more demonstrations. How much do you also think this is about socioeconomic factors, or is it in the end about unseating President Hosni Mubarak?
I think they're not mutually exclusive. What we saw yesterday in terms of the people, the slogans they were chanting, actually tells you that there is a deep understanding of how complex issues are and how interrelated they are, in the sense that impoverishment comes with corruption and because of corruption, and they both go hand in hand with a dictatorship with no accountability, no transparency, no recourse for people for anything. And I think this understanding opens channels and takes us to a new horizon altogether in terms of what are the prospects of change, what are we talking about. And it's also an amazing moment, bringing together people who have been working and calling and mobilizing for socioeconomic demands like labor strikes and workers, hand in hand with young people and the social protest movements that have been calling for regime change. So I think the bridging that we have been hoping for to happen the past 5 years, and that people were working for, is starting to become to come to the fore, to become fruitful, and it was very clear yesterday.
But some people argue that ordinary Egyptians want democracy, but they will not fight for it. To what extent are Egyptians willing to fight and die for this cause?
What I saw yesterday, and trust me, it was a war zone. I saw an amount of blood that I've never seen in my life, not even on TV. The use of rubber bullets, the use of tear gas, people were choking to death. I saw horrific scenes of rubber bullets hitting people in the face, in the head, and they're still going.
And of course,
I think
No, go ahead.
No, I think the Egyptian protesters yesterday, the majority of them on the street for the first time, young people, men and women who are not ideological in any way, have shown an amazing level of courage yesterday. Until 3 o'clock in the morning, people were running, choking from tear gas, and persistent to continue with their protest. Today, the same thing. People are getting together, trying to organize and see what is the next step.
Afshin Rattanzi, looking at this from a little further away from your vantage point, does it look like if the Tunisians can do it, then the Egyptians certainly can as well?
Well, I think there were reports that Hosni and Gamal Mubarak were on a plane to Heathrow here in London. That turned out not to be the case. There's lots of different ideas about what's going on. As Rabab was saying, this story is changing minute by minute. I mean, who knows, even this network, Al Jazeera, might have a part to play, because let's not forget, Egypt is Israel's big ally in the region, and we're now hearing that the elements of the Palestinian Authority caving into Zionist pressure. There are so many issues now hurting the Egyptian government, but of course it is the socio-economic one that is stretching across the Maghreb, and certainly many people are saying that Libya's Colonel Gaddafi has made the wrong call. We're not hearing so much news about Algeria, but there were copycat self-immolations like Mohammed Abu Zizi in Tunisia going on in Algeria. So, and of course further east, Jordan. So I think it is very much in flames, but we've seen these things before. Perhaps this is the perfect storm.
Is this the tipping point, Rabab El-Mahdi, do you think?
I don't think it's the tipping point in the sense that things will change by the end of this month or by next month. But I think it's the tipping point in the sense of people, a process of mobilization that's culminating a monumental history, in a monumental moment in history, where the sense of possibilities is being wide open. Again, I think what you said about the Tunisian experience is very correct. But again, I want to say that none of us a month ago thought the protests in Tunisia will end the regime. I think the situation in Egypt is a little different and hence difficult because of, again, the role and the entrenchment of the army, and because the Egyptian regime have used cooptation mechanism and coercion in a very flexible way, much more than Ben Ali could do. So yes, there are some differences that might make the Egyptian process take longer, but it's definitely a tipping point in the sense that that process, the countdown for this regime, I think, was very clear and visible yesterday with the tear gases and people, trying to stay and take hold of the street.
Afshin Rattanzi,
if I interrupt, I think President Obama, though, is crucial in all of this. All it takes is a couple of words from President Obama and some change of bank account details at the U.S. Treasury, and that could have a decisive influence. There's no doubt that it would have been very difficult for the people to have overthrown Ben Ali if the same kind of funding was coming from the United States. President Obama at the State of the Union speech didn't say properly, we support the people of Egypt, like he did when he, in the case of Tunisia.
But didn't he wait until it was the end of the regime before he did say he supported the people of Tunisia, their courage and their dignity? Didn't that come a bit too late as well?
But I suppose he waited until the media generally was saying these are unprecedented demonstrations in the capital of, you name the country, because that's certainly what we're hearing from Cairo, isn't it? These are unprecedented demonstrations in Egypt, on the streets of Egypt. We mustn't forget the Suez Canal. There are huge economic implications of this as well. I heard the Egyptian stock market dropped around 6%. So, people were saying that with Tunisia as well. It was quite surprising that Obama backed the rioters in Tunisia.
Afshin Rattanzi, let me just end with Rabab El-Mahdi. How far do you think the protesters will take this in Egypt?
It's easy to push people to that verge or tipping point, but it's very, very difficult to take them back, to take back the sense of confidence, the sense of possibility, the horizons that they saw yesterday when they were taking control of the streets, and hence their country, their destiny.
Rabab El-Mahdi and Afshin Rattanzi, thank you both for joining us on this edition of Inside Story and sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you very much for watching. We, of course, welcome your suggestions and comments. As always, you can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me and the team, thanks for watching.